Wire Mark and Elsie Escobar. We are so excited to bring you an exciting and kind of a chaptery 2 feel today as we get in a little bit to journalism and talking about what happens when we don't report facts, or if there's anything that does happen to us when we don't report facts, and what happens when we re-report them. Oh my gosh, we got so many questions and we're so excited to get into it. Please roll that intro credit, our awesome Bree in the background. That's so cool. I get so stoked about that every time because I know how much work that takes. Good morning, Elsie. I love the shirt that you're rocking. I love the Yellow She podcast. How are you doing today? How are things going on in Elsie World?
Elsie World is going well. I'm working on another project that I don't know. Maybe I will talk about it at the end of this episode, but I don't know. So that's been keeping me busy for the entire March History Month, Women's History Month, which is March, not March History Month. Because that's weird.
Women's March History Month, women's history, it all works.
Yes.
Yes, and how about you, Sir Gordon? How are you?
Gordon World is good too. Thank you. It's been a bit of a morning here in LA with kids not wanting to go to school and things like that. But, overall, life is good. Thanks for asking.
Good. Technology changes, but the kids don't in that way, because I was trying to do the same damn thing back in the day.
I think I was going to play video games,
I would go to the nurse's office. I'd be like, I did not study for that math test. No, thank you. Math was not my favorite, so I get it. That is one of my favorite parts about what we do on this show, is talk a little bit about real life when we talk about all the cool things that we get to experience in the media world. Elsie, you've experienced so many really neat things as part of She Podcast, as part of Libsyn, as part of your travels as a podcaster. The same for you, Gordon. You've experienced the ups and downs and varieties of entertainment industries. And then at the end of it, we all go home to a kid that's trying to get out of a math test.
Yes.
Or we are fighting the clickbait that our kids are potentially getting scammed on, or the clickbait that our parents are potentially getting scammed on. And that is the cool part about some of the stuff we get to do here, because we do get to be on both sides of the mic a little bit. And it's a really unique position. And I'm so grateful for this space as we get into it today, that each of you have provided this really comfortable and tense, but for the right reasons, conversation around what is facing creators, around brands and small businesses, because really creators are brands and are small businesses. So it's important to think of yourself as an entity in addition to an individual. And those are the things we talk about with the social, ethical, and legal perspectives. We are going to jump right into it because this is such a new territory. And I would love to start with a little legal foundation when it comes to the journalism and the ethics portion of it, Gordon. If you wouldn't mind taking us a little into maybe what you see as the relationship. That is actually my first question. What is the relationship between journalism and, say, a podcaster, or journalism and, say, an influencer? Because journalism has been around for a long time, but the coin term influencer and podcaster is relatively new. So are those the same thing?
Well, I think that there are some kinds of podcasting, some kinds of content creation, whether it's YouTube or even, tweets and TikTok and all those kinds of things. Some kinds are journalism and some pretty clearly aren't. The gal who does the jump rope stuff, I don't think she's a journalist. I don't think she thinks of herself as a journalist, although it's fascinating, entertaining, and maybe even informative, educational on how to do this stuff. But I think we have to define journalism, I guess, and that's a hard one to do, other than to say it's the sharing of information with the public. And I would add, for the benefit of the public and society as a whole. At least I think that's how we should think about it. And I guess it's a little bit in the eye of the beholder, or maybe the eye of the creator. Do you think of yourself as a journalist? And just being transparent about that. If you're not doing journalism and you say, hey, this isn't journalism, I'm just sharing my opinions, that's awesome. That's great. That's the kind of transparency we talk about a lot on this show. On the other hand, if you are reporting what appears to be fact in order to get people to take action or respond a certain way, well, isn't that what journalists have been doing for centuries? And in American government, we talk about the press as the fourth estate of government. We have the executive, we have the legislature, we have the judiciary, and then we have the journalists, the news media as the sort of watchdogs. But who's watching the watchdogs nowadays is really the big question.
Yeah, I agree with that whole who's watching the watchdogs kind of thing is challenging at least at this time, because it feels to me that there's a lot of stories that also don't get the same type of watch, right? So you get an over representation of information going into one sector, and you don't get all of it. And there's also a sense of what we were talking about in terms of bias, and particularly within in the podcasting sphere. Like, something that I consume a lot of is on YouTube is like all the pop culture stuff. Like, if I'm watching a show, I love to look at the breakdowns of everything that's being done on YouTube when it comes to like, ooh, these are the Easter eggs, or here's a backstory and things like that. And oftentimes you always see leaning towards one specific type of a narrative, even within pop culture or coverage of shows that are of a specific genre. And is it because the audience is there, or is it because the other ones I haven't found? I don't know. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, let's. I'm going to extend the metaphor a little bit. The watchdogs are off the leash. They're out of the yard. They're off the leash.
Yes.
They're running around crazy. And what are they doing? They're going after the juiciest, most flavorful meat.
Right.
So there is a lot of stuff that either just isn't appealing to the sensibilities of the watchdogs themselves, the journalists, and so they're not covering it. And there's no real incentive for them to do so, unless someone holds their feet to the fire, and that someone has to be either their audience, or I guess maybe government gets involved and says you need to do more. There used to be a principle called the fairness doctrine in media that required broadcasters to present multiple sides of an issue, and that went away in the late 80s, and then we saw the rise of Fox News and other one-sided media, and it changed the game, the economics of broadcasting dramatically, when we can pander and I use pander as a bit of a loaded expression, but we can pander to a particular audience. And I think that's what you're talking about, Elsie, is unless there's a big enough audience to make it economically sensible to report certain stories or come at things from a particular perspective, what you're left with is the activist media, and I don't mean activist in a pejorative way. I just mean sort of socially conscious media, shouting in the wilderness a bit.
Yeah, if you go to a vegan restaurant, sometimes you expect to be served vegan food, and that is sort of what we get with our 24-hour cable news now. Is we go into our cable news expecting a thing, and with the rise of AI and algorithms and all the things we do to collect data, we are able to cater our message as closely to our current audience as we potentially want to. And I would say that the industry drives some of this too, because the industry can choose to report on something different, but they go for short-term gains. What I hear a lot, and what both of you have said, is short-term gains in terms of how it serves people. It may serve people for the next 5 minutes, but are you serving humanity for more than 5 minutes at a time?
I think there's a reality here. You go to that vegan restaurant, you shouldn't expect to be able to get a steak any more than if you go to a steakhouse. You should expect to be given a wide array of vegan menu options. And the same is sort of true with how the media operates. Unfortunately, it's the fundamentals of the economic marketplace that we're in. But I think we can all do better. And I think as podcasters and creators, most of us who are, today here, I think we're doing a kind of journalism. We're trying to present multiple points of view, looking at a thing through a bunch of different lenses. And I would just call on other media creators to do more of that and be more responsible as they think about what they're going to cover and how they're going to cover it, and what they do following up also.
Yeah, I feel that, at least for me, I have 2 other shows, right? And as a creator, I know that in one of the shows, I present one point of view on an issue, and it's a little bit more, I would say, as unbiased as something can be given the fact that it's a company podcast,
Yeah.
right? So there obviously is an inherent bias in the fact that a company is putting this podcast on. So
Right,
there's that.
There's an
But
interest.
but there is a little bit more of this is what's happening. These are some thoughts that we have around it that are, I would say, more on the analytical side and a more trying to weigh all the issues and what's really harmful or maybe wrong that we feel, and it's stated outright in a very calm fashion. And then I have my other show where it's a little less so, right? There is a lot more personality involved in it. There's a lot more emotion around issues. There's a lot more less watching what I'm going to say, right? Because there's always like this depending upon the medium, you always think, like I think about it like when you get dressed up to go to a party and you, whether or not, or maybe you're going to go and you're going to meet you're going to be interviewed for an interview or something like that. There's a certain way that you dress and hold yourself, and it's not that it's less than I am, but it's appropriate for the medium itself. And
Right.
I think that there are times when a lot of the journalists, or that I've seen as of late, that a little bit it starts to get blurred, right? It looks as if you're going into a job interview, but what you're saying is actually a little bit more cloaked with your personal vibes and feelings.
Yeah. Well, I think this actually raises an interesting point that, it isn't entirely fair to just dump the ethical burden on the creators.
Correct.
I think the audience has an ethical responsibility to attend to the information.
And who's paying?
Well, yeah.
Always follow the money. The money controls it. And I respect what you're saying about consumers, but consumers, I will always be the advocate for this because my people are regular people and they're not super educated.
Well, but consumers, I guess what I'm saying is consumers need to be conscious that somebody's paying for this to happen, or somebody is behind this message. There's a point of view and a perspective. And I think that's one of the areas where we as a society lately, and particularly in the way we educate kids about media literacy, which we've been talking about a lot on the show, we have a responsibility to make sure that kids and everybody who consumes media understands the economics a little bit, understands that, hey, just because I'm hearing it on this particular news source, A, doesn't mean it's necessarily 100% true, and B, it's presented with some perspective, some bias, some there's an angle. In fact, journalists for centuries have been talking about what's the angle on the story that we're going to take. That's what makes it interesting. Just the facts, ma'am, is nice for Dragnet, but it isn't really so good for selling newspapers or just
for selling. It's good for newspapers, bad for selling.
Story. Yeah, yeah. And we do have this conflict of commerce and information. Giving raw information isn't useful, and it costs money to create information sources that people care about and want to listen or consume. And so in order to get that money, we've got to sell ads, and then we have to, we've got multiple masters to serve.
There's something to add to the teaching our children and media literacy and all of that stuff. Like one of the first things that I've always done is sort of like check the source, right? I've always checked the source just naturally. But let's say for a podcast, I would say it's fairly easy to do something like that, where you could put your source in the show notes. I do that all the time with my podcasts. I'm sure we do this here on the chat. If we're quoting an article, generally you'll see it on the chat there. There's a reference point where people can read the source of where we're getting the material right off the bat, right? But what's really interesting is that a lot of folks as of late are gathering, especially the younger generation, are getting their news from places like TikTok and or Instagram, which it's very challenging to get to the source, right? Because there are lots of links, right? Because sometimes, as reported on, and then there's screenshots of whatever the place is. And if it is like, let's say the New York Times has an Instagram account, you can tag them and then you have to go to their thing and then you got to click through the stuff. But if it's your account and you're reporting on something from the New York Times, how do you put that in there for people to reference and really look it through? Right. So our kids are having a harder time doing that.
Mhm. Well, we have
And
to
reading
teach them to ask the question, is the real thing. Just where's this coming from? What do they have going on behind the scenes that might be influencing that? And fact is, influencer, hey, why are you carrying that handbag? Why are you talking about this handbag? Well, it's because the makers of the handbag are paying you, right?
Which is disclosure, transparency. Just put it on. Just be honest about what it is. We appreciate your content,
Yeah.
so we probably aren't going to be mad that you're making a living on
But
it.
is
if we
it too
still
much
love
to
you.
is it too much to expect that 15-year-old going on TikTok to talk about something that's bugging them to tell you their background and perspective, especially when the 13-year-old who's consuming it isn't, they look at that person, oh, they've got a big TikTok following, they're an authority, when in fact that is just not the case.
Well,
So
can a 16-year-old make money influencing now? Because previously you had to be 18 to work in this country, or with a workers thing. So there's a whole different
lots of
deep
gray areas.
whole conversation about, like, are we paying 15-year-olds? And
Yeah.
when in history recently have we expected that a 15-year-old is ready to enter a small business market?
Yeah.
Right. But also, I know you, Gordon, you've been an entertainment lawyer for so long, and I'm sure you've seen, contracts or so with underage folks who are
sure.
making money in entertainment, and it's a thing, so there's precedence for that.
Absolutely. I mean, lots of issues here. So, in preparing for today, I did a little bit of a dive into the concept of journalist ethics. And, we've already sort of talked about this distinction between what is and what isn't journalism, and probably need to cast that net wider to capture more of the creation that's going on. But there's a bunch of different, first of all, there's a great article that it's from the folks that make Masterclass, those home trainings. Bob Woodward has a class on journalism ethics, and there's an article that comes with that, and so there's a link in the chat right now. It's a great sort of quick summary of what are the issues and what are the sort of standard ethical principles, and there's a lot of them. But I went looking. There's a bunch of different codes of ethics created by various organizations. There's the radio, television news directors. There's the media. What is it? New York Times Ethical Journalism Guidebook. The Society of Professional Journalism. And the one that I saw the other day is from Al Jazeera. Interestingly, their code of ethics says adhere to the journalistic values of honesty, courage, fairness, balance, independence, credibility, and diversity, giving no priority to commercial or political considerations over professional ones. And that's just point number one of their 10-point code of ethics. I highly recommend that folks go look for, just Google code of ethics and maybe add Al Jazeera in there if you want to read that one. I think it's a really good one. It talks about distinguishing between news material and opinion and analysis to avoid the pitfalls of speculation and propaganda.
They've been after some of that for a while. I remember hearing Al Jazeera sort of become a more prominent name in the U.S., like at a pretty tense time for the relations between our very different cultures and worlds. And I'm happy to see them raising the standard, because I know they've been like crowdsourcing their news. They don't have Bob Woodward. They don't have the people who've been doing it for
a lot of professional journalists on the staff.
Professional, but more new to the world, so they have like a lot of contribution. So I think it's pretty cool.
That diversity component, I think, is a really important part of it, because historically, I mean, you look, the New York Times. I mean, I think there's plenty of people of color in there. Maybe not an accurate distribution, but it's been historically, all the major media has historically been white, male dominated, and some of that's just the white patriarchal society we live in over time. But they're making progress, and there is media that is a good represenation of people these days.
It's hard to fight old money. How do we fight old money in the news industry, Elsie? How do we get the old money?
Because holy monkeys. You know what I see that the biggest issue, even as a person, like just in everyday folk, because there's obviously we need to, like, that's a high level conversation that I think does need to be had with lots of smart people getting together and really figuring out and dismantling things. Get that. But then I think that where I see and I am guilty of this too, so I'm taking responsibility for this as well. I tend to really also gravitate towards like the sensationalist stuff. Like I try to stop myself from doing it. Like if I see an image, I'm like, oh, what
It's
is
human
that?
nature.
You know, and I click through, right? And then I see a soundbite or of something that isn't something that is that I'm deeply in, right? So I don't fall for that in my own industry so much. Like if I see headlines around the podcasting industry, I tend to do a little bit more of an eye roll and keep going and just do my own research and not go into that narrative, because I know enough to know that most of the time that's not true, or in some way it's a little bit misleading, or it's not the full story.
Do you ever call that out?
No, why would? But you know why? Because I have no time of the day to be calling people out when I got work to do. Because I have to change the world. Because I actually have to be in the room talking to people, trying to dismantle these leadership positions or ways of working. And that takes my divided attention. I don't want to get into a fight with people on Instagram or on social media or via email. I have no time for that. So that's why I don't.
No, and I appreciate it. That's so one of the reasons I asked that is because Bree asked a while ago, what can we do as consumers? I think more people should have a podcast. This is self-serving in some ways, but I also think true is podcast opens up more voices to this, and cross-checking our information and inviting our peers and our listeners to cross-check our information and then tell us what they find. Like, I think that there is some crowdsourcing that can go on, and we've seen podcasters do that, whether it be murder mysteries, there are regular, like you're saying, Elsie, that come from that world who can make a pretty profound difference, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And do we have that article that we were discussing prior to this of that woman who supposedly that documentary that went live over at South by Southwest of the true crime person who was exactly what you're just saying, which is they were reporting on an issue, right? And that was very deep to them, and they felt that something was a little off and decided to go into this specific true crime story and kind of got in over their head. Now, I cannot, in full disclosure, this documentary has not, at the time of this recording, has not been released for all of us or any of us here that are discussing this to be seen. So we do not have any.
Is Citizen Sleuth, and it was released at South by Southwest. It hasn't been distributed yet. I'm sorry, continue. I just wanted to make sure people knew what we were talking about.
Yeah. And thank you. And so in that documentary, it shows the journey between someone like an everyday citizen who becomes a sleuth in trying to find a solution or maybe the culprit of this true crime. And in the end, it doesn't look like there was one. And there is something that happens in the process of the storytelling where it becomes a lot more than the podcaster is even able to responsibly take care of. And I believe that they disappeared off of the podcasting.
Yeah, and in fact, it actually raises interesting questions. If this citizen sleuth hadn't had a camera following her around, might she have handled some of the facts that she came into knowledge of differently than she would when she knew everybody was watching, behind the scenes? There was a review of the movie, and it opened with an interesting paragraph. And if you'll indulge me, I'll read it. It says, "True crime podcasting is a place of murky, ethically gray areas. For every rigorously researched reporting of a murder mystery, there might be dozens where amateur sleuths dabble in plagiarism, wild speculation, and unchecked conspiracy theories, all while cracking jokes or refilling wine glasses. These true crime fans turned content creators might see themselves as heroes for forgotten victims, but the slippery and sophisticated documentary Citizen Sleuth exposes a dark underbelly to these altruistic ambitions, and it raises all kinds of really tough ethical questions, not to mention the legal angles on this."
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I can't wait to get into this movie because there's it reminds me a little bit of, in terms of the structure of it, just to like podcast for a second, of Only Murders in the Building, where when they operate in that show, it's like so relatable. It was relatable to me as a podcaster and as an independent media creator, because that's what they're getting into. And I'm hopeful that Citizen Sleuth will be another sort of peering into somebody who's gone down that path a little bit too far. And even if there's a little drama, maybe will teach us a little bit about where we could pause next time and ask some secondary and follow-up questions, and maybe reach out to a resource like a Gordon or even like an Elsie, somebody in the industry. Like, know your boundaries as an independent creator and ask for partnership. There are a lot of people in the media industry who I have found extremely supportive, especially of independent creators, who will probably be willing to help you if you find yourself in a situation like this person did. I think that the community that is media, not everybody, right? But I think that the media community, especially podcasting, is extraordinarily supportive of better journalism, of better ethics. So I think if you find yourself wondering about these things, first and foremost, don't rely on everything you read, but also reach out to someone. I mean, there are so many great resources like y'all who will dive in and at least tell you, like, stop here, don't keep going.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to say, I don't think that most folks that are doing podcasting, media creation, whatever, whether you think of yourselves as a professional or not, whether you think of yourself as a journalist or not, I would say the vast majority have good intentions and know, they're not trying to put one over on people or get away with something or even necessarily steer a narrative in a direction that they are even conscious about. It's the unconscious bias, and the confirmation bias is a really tricky thing, because most of the time when it's showing up and doing its worst, we don't even realize it. The creator doesn't even realize the bias is there. So that's just, I just want to be really clear. Now, we're not calling people out saying you're a bad person because you're doing this. So,
and part of it is that we're also learning on the fly, because again, there was a sense before, right? That you went to school, you learned how to become a journalist. You got a degree. I'm not talking here like just because you have a degree, you're better than anybody else. That's not what I'm saying. But there's a certain amount of knowledge, right? You study these are the basic things that you need to know in order for you to step in here. And then you gave everybody, not you, but the world, now we have access to go live, to put our podcast out there, to have our own personal platform at any time of the day, right? And so that is a beautiful tool that can be used, and it can be so empowering to so many people to really cut through a lot of red tape and just doors open and really reach an audience and really be of benefit, and also do the exact same opposite thing, which could cause a lot of harm that you're not even thinking that you're going to be doing, and that it can actually propagate something that isn't necessarily the best if that tool is in the hands of somebody who doesn't know how powerful it is. So we are in that position now where those boundaries and the ways of working within the media sphere as it is now doesn't exist. We just don't have that. That's why we're having this show, so that we can discuss, what does it actually look like? What does it do? How can I understand that this microphone that I have in me and my ability to stream to all of my audience, just because we decided to go live at, this time of the day on a Friday, that now we've got, like, all of a sudden, does that make us more powerful than somebody else who's not? I don't know.
Well, power dynamics are really, that's a whole other topic we can address sometime.
That's true.
I just had to let it hang. That was so important, Elsie, what you just said.
Well, Bree is telling us it's time to get into legal stuff. So.
Well, it does bring up what you're saying, Elsie, like all the things is like the two sides of all the wonderfulness that it can be to be a creator and or influencer, whatever, as a business owner. Because really, creators, I want to redefine influencers and creators. You're a brand, you're a business. You should always, if you're doing that type of stuff, you are a brand, you are a business, you will be treated as such by the law, you will be treated as such by the public. You are an actor, you're a performer, you will be treated as such by the public. So regardless of what you think your mic means, the social angle is that you are going to be treated not like Matt Damon, but you have a similar platform as a Matt Damon or as a Beyonce if you put music out there independently created. So there's a lot of a lot of precedent really to set us. So we think this is new sometimes, but that's where I'm really curious on the legal side, specifically with consequences too. What happens from a legal perspective? Socially, I think we know a little bit. We've done a good job of nailing that down pretty good today. Tell me, Gordon, from a precedent, from a legal standard, if we misreport facts or if we even reshare bullcrap, what does that mean for us? What kind of position does that put us in?
Yeah, there's a raft of different kinds of consequences, sort of depending on the nature of the content that's being shared and so on. And in the true crime arena, you've got the potential for libel. If you're talking about a crime that occurred and you name names and accuse people of things that they've done, maybe not even accusing them of the crime, but maybe you're saying something about how the cops handled it or whatever, you are running the risk of defamation, libel. And if that information turns out not to be accurate, I'll say the word false, and it's truthful, factual kind of tone to things, and it hurts someone's reputation. You got libel right there, and that can be a big deal. And there have been a number of cases involving libel. I was actually just preparing some slides, and unfortunately I don't have them on my screen for me, but I think I've got 6 or 7 different podcast scenarios that in the last couple of years there have been libel suits against podcasters for the content that they put out, and in fact one of them was an accusation that the cops didn't do something right, or that somebody cooperated with helping a convicted criminal get off, or trying to find them the right kind of representation, or all kinds of things can just create a really negative impression about a person, intentionally or not. Right now we're watching big news going on with this is not in the podcasting space, but Fox News is being sued by Dominion Voting Systems in a multi-billion-dollar libel case, when the broadcast, it seems to have come out again. We're reporting on the reporting, but
allegedly,
well, and it seems to have come out that the broadcast, the hosts on Fox News knew what they were being told to say on the air was bull. And if that isn't libel, and it hurts the reputation of this company, I think that's the kind of thing. Another situation,
it hurts us all.
Yeah,
it makes me sick to my stomach.
Yeah. Another situation in the Idaho murders case that's been in the news a lot for the last few months. There was a TikToker who went on and she was I guess she's a psychic or a tarot card reader or something, and she basically led her viewers to a conclusion that this particular professor at the university there was responsible for the crime, when in fact that professor was in a different state, in a different country at the time that the murders took place. And so that professor now is tarred with the brush of these weird false statements that were then spread by other TikTokers, and we'll get to that in a second. And now when she goes looking for another job at another university, if they don't, and I think it'd be negligent not to Google a job applicant nowadays.
That's going to show up to us.
Yeah, and it that kind of thing shows up, and even if it isn't assumed to be factual, it just permeates and flavors the thinking. But anyway, I'll come back to the retweeting stuff because it applies to all of these. But if you're doing journalism that looks like an endorsement, if you're talking about brands and products and things like that, and that's where influencers really come in, it's a blurry line. Where do you cross the line from sales pitch to journalism? And sometimes they're doing both in the same tweet or same message or whatever. You can run afoul of the FTC guidelines and the rules about false and misleading advertising. If you're sharing investment information or advice and information just about businesses, financial information, you could be accused of manipulating stock prices or insider trading and those kinds of things. And there's a recent class action that's been filed against a bunch of YouTubers because they were talking about FTX.
Yeah.
And now these YouTubers who, some of whom, there's accusations that they were being paid by FTX, but whether they were or not, they were talking and hyping this thing that turned out to be a big old, I don't know if you call it a Ponzi scheme or some kind of a mess. Then there's questions about, in true crime, when we dive into these investigations, again, the Idaho murder situation, are we somehow getting in the way of what the cops are trying to do. If they're investigating a crime, and there are these other amateur sleuths out there also investigating,
And
are
should
they
be
poisoning the well? Are they flavoring the discussion in ways that they shouldn't? Again, they're not asking questions in the same way that police do and investigators and lawyers do. So is that obstruction of justice? Are they maybe depriving defendants of getting a fair trial?
Are they maybe turning the cameras on when the cops turn them off?
Well, there's that. I mean, also nowadays we've also got the situation with the cop videotaping their interaction with a suspect, or the traffic. There was a situation just a week or two ago where this cop was live streaming his traffic stops.
Yeah.
And revealing private information about these people. So there's all kinds of, a traffic stop to the uninitiated, to those of us that grew up watching cops on television. It looks like the person is guilty when the law says they're innocent until proven guilty. True. And, just the fact that the cops have stopped you and are talking to you makes you look like you did something wrong, when in fact, it's entirely possible it's the cops doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And, so these are the kinds of things that we as responsible podcasters, I think we ought to be talking about and sensitive to, and all of that. And, I mean, I can go on and on. We're into an area where we might be thinking about doing disclaimers.
Yeah.
And then, that raises questions about, are we in a disclaimer culture? If you,
yes.
Does the toaster you buy at the store really need to have a label saying, don't use this in the bath? Because you might get electrocuted, Unfortunately, we live in a society that's very,
or in journalism, at least. I think what you're talking about is consumer products, which is maybe a little different than journalism. But I think disclosure,
you can overwhelm the message with the disclaimers.
Yes. And I think that is something to pay attention to there, Trevor, because like I agree. Like I would love to see a point of view, or if it was something there where I could quickly go like, oh, what's the point of view on this? Or what's the disclosure? But at the same time, if it's always being disclosed, my personal brain will just dismiss it from now on. Like I'm not even going to pay attention to it. I'm just going to look at the word that says disclosure. And I'm not going to read the actual disclosure as to what the point of view is. And I'm calling myself out on this stuff too, because there's many times when I'll read an article, I'll read a headline, I'll scan, I think I got it. And then I immediately respond to somebody, or I send it along and go like, I didn't get, a very clear question that was answered in the article that I obviously did not read. And I see that happens all the time when I post on social. People, like, I literally just did that. And I will write, here's point 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'll get, what do we do now? And I'm like, I don't know about what 1, 2, 3, and 4. It spells it out for you.
But, Elsie, yesterday when we were talking about preparing for the show, you mentioned that you don't like to talk to media and respond to press inquiries at the pace that they want you to, because you have to think about and be measured about what you say. But yet you just said that's what you're doing in the social media space. So that we've got this sort of dichotomy. And again, it comes to our responsibility as consumers and as creators, especially when we're sharing other stuff or resharing and commenting. And that's where the TikToker who goes public and makes the thing and it goes viral, well, we're all complicit in making that information go viral. And so again, it falls on us to be responsible as consumers as well as creators. So
this is so heavy. I've had so many thoughts in recent days and weeks that this show that this concept needs like 4 partner shows so that we can extend the discussion.
Oh my God.
So even if you just pick any of the topics we've gone over in the prior 4 or 5 weeks, they just are, there's so many points of view. Elsie, you said something that I think is so important, which is when we're reporting or listening within a scope, within a topic, then we, by nature of time constraints, at the very least, we only have limited amount of time to try to gather other perspectives. If it's not included, and how are we to know? Well, we have to do the research and the legwork. And so there really is a lot of considerations, and we are also in a golden age of more voices in our ears than ever. So there is an opportunity potentially to find more because we have access to more. So I'm so encouraged that we continue to have this. I want to read straight off something in the notes to continue to encourage everybody who's with us and us to call ourselves. Elsie, you've done that and set a hell of an example today about calling ourselves on any places that we need to continue to tighten our own brands and tighten our own ways that we do these things, because that's the way we move this conversation forward, is by turning inward first, by looking at our own brand, looking at our own selves, our own companies, our own interests, and saying to myself, where are my blind spots? Where are the things that we're not covering? And I know, as a person with my demographics, there is a ton of stuff that I am missing every single day. There is a ton of blinders that I have on to a million things that I can't possibly report on. So find a friend. Find a friend. Elsie, you mentioned a project that you are potentially, I don't want to put you on the spot. You don't have to mention it, but I want to give you time and space to mention it if you want to. I think it relates heavily, because I know what you talk about when you're not with us, both of you, relates heavily to what we do talk about in this show. And I love tuning into She Podcast Live, to Gordon, to your multiple lives when you go live at different times, because they do extend this conversation. Yeah. I'm very grateful for that. Elsie, do you want to go into what you're working on that may or may not be related?
I'm very quickly just going to touch on it, and then I'll reveal more as we come through. Absolutely. But I think, last year I started a little bit of a movement called #ClaimPodParity. And the month of March, we really brought visibility to women-led and other underrepresented genders-led businesses in podcasting. And we showcased a lot of them. And it was a wonderful month, lots of work, just to bring awareness to these businesses that exist, and a lot of women-led podcast consultants or experts in the space that often don't get heard, because there's an awful lot of dudes doing this work, right? So I just wanted to point that out. It was during that month. Now, the thing that I didn't really particularly feel good about is the fact that when the month was over, I didn't really get the impact that my whole goal of doing that was to get money in the pockets of these businesses, so that they could continue working. That's it. So that they could build viable businesses. And that was great for visibility, but it wasn't really great for the impact that I wanted. So this month I've spent it cultivating an idea around getting more women hired and other underrepresented genders in podcasting, actually getting them hired. Because I do see a gap between when people go like, you know what, I really want to have like a non-binary individual on my team, or I really want to have a Black woman working and creating my graphic design. And I do see that it's not that there's a lack of people. Sometimes the connections are not there. It's like person here to person there, right? So I am working on a project. It's got this name that is so creative. It is called Hire Women and Underrepresented Genders in Podcasting. So that's the name of the thing. That's all it's called. And I'll divulge a little bit more about that very soon. My goal is to be able to launch at the end of this month, and possibly maybe the beginning of next month, but it's slowly going to be growing. And this is really meant to bring professionals so that you can hire them. So my goal is for people to go like, I'm looking for a producer. Oh, here they are, exactly what you want. Or if somebody who's a podcaster and is building a team and wants to build a really diverse team, they can look through there really quickly and be able to see it. And it's all going to be done via podcast, because that is my heart. And so therein lies the innovation. It is it's a podcast directory, but not a podcast directory like we know, like Apple Podcasts and stuff. It's not that. It is a podcast as a directory. So it's a tool for delivering the knowledge and the information. We're going to start with podcast first, but it's going to spread more. So that's
is incredible, Elsie. I am so stoked to hear that. It's an idea that I had heard floated, not specifically to the area you're focusing, but the concept of helping, like in that way, where you use the format to preview and to highlight and to promote, because it is a medium that podcasters be podcasting. And we listen to podcasts, so that's a great. I have so many connections. My wife is a skateboarder. I may have brought this up. I can't help it. But she skates in the subculture that is the same subculture that you're speaking to. It is the same demographics that you're speaking to, and they feel the same way in the skate world. And I would posit that they probably this group of disenfranchised non-males, let's just say it for what it is, are not feeling as connected to all the cultural norms and all the cultural benefits and all the cultural reaping the rewards that the industries they operate in can offer. So thank you for doing that. I know it means a lot to their community too. I can't wait to collide the two. I have resources in LA along those lines that I'll also be excited to connect you with. That is so good for the industry and so good for us. So thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, that's so cool. We're going to get close to wrapping. We have so many things that we could talk about, as always, in here. And it is always crushing to have to get to the end, but we do because we all have so many things to do and our listeners do. And we want to extend the discussion. So please consider, if you are listening or watching with us today or us in this group, continue the discussion in the socials like we do anyways. Continue using those mediums for a positive, which is adding to the negative. Like, you can't get rid of the negative sometimes, but you can add positive contributions to this conversation. Gordon, you are adding some positive to the contribution. You have a workshop coming up on Monday to help us not get busted, right?
I do.
That's hilarious.
Maybe I should change the title to "Don't Get Busted." But
I know, that's so great.
Yeah, it's called Business and Legal Fundamentals for Podcast Growth and Profit. It's a free workshop that I'm holding. You can come on over to event.podcastlaw.net and register. I'm looking forward to it. It's 9 a.m. Pacific time, Monday, the 27th of March. I do this a few times a year, and I'm looking forward to it. And then once we are done with that, I'll be opening up the doors to my course/program, product, whatever you want to call it. It's called Easy Legal for Podcasters, where we have a bunch of resources for podcasters to do a lot of this stuff yourself, but not alone, with help from me and the forms and templates and things like that we provide. So that's called Easy Legal for Podcasters, and that's opening up next week for a special promotion. So that's really exciting. But next week is a crazy busy week for me. I'm also doing a talk for Podfest Global.
Podfest Global. I got us a spot there, by the way. I haven't told you all this. Can I reveal a little information?
Go for it.
Oh my gosh.
I reached out to Andrew, everybody's best friend at Podfest, Andrew. So Chris Kremistos and his crew run it, and Andrew is like the voice of the people and to the people. And I told him what we're doing, gave him a little insight, asked him if there would be any space for us to hold a panel, a side discussion, if you all are interested in that. He said absolutely. He said they would sponsor it for us and get the word out there. He also said he has some complimentary tickets. So he's working on getting me the code for that. I have one that would be like a referral code from us, which is not super helpful right now, but we're hopefully going to get some complimentary tickets to attend the Digital Podfest Global so that we can help promote what they're doing and also this conversation. So I wanted to like give you a little reveal that Podfest was all in on this, and we can talk a little bit more about the logistics of that. But what is your speech at Podfest this coming week?
Well, my talk is about true crime podcasting and how to stay out of the crosshairs of the legal side of it. And so it's a lot of the same stuff that we've been talking about today, with the true crime as the sort of angle on the story, as it were. And we'll be talking about libel and copyright and privacy rights and plagiarism, which is another big thing that's come up in that area. And I think I talk at, what is it? I think it's 12:30 p.m. Pacific time next Thursday. That's the 30th. So I hope you can join. And if you're not already planning to attend Podfest Global, I guess you can use the code PODFAM49, as it says in the chat, for a free ticket to Podfest Global. And I hope to see you there. I welcome your questions and all that after my presentation, and look forward to it. So
it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun. The busy summer, the conference season is coming. I know we have She Podcast Live is coming up in June. Is that right?
Yes. June 19th. Get your tickets. It starts June 19th. So please, it would be amazing for you to attend.
Yes, please do. Creator Lab is where I hang out when I'm not here. Just a little self-promotion. So Bree can run those things. We are Numo Spec Media. We do this kind of we want to encourage this kind of conversation. This is the type of conversation that I would like to fill more of the airwaves with. And I am not special. I just want to find the people, bring them together in a space like this, and keep the conversation going. So that is what we seek to do at Numospect, is to shake things up. We don't want to be a disruptor. We want to be a contributor. Disruptor is a lot more fun to say, but contributor is a lot more meaningful, I think, to the industries that we all serve. So that being said, this has been another exciting, lit episode. I'm trying to use cool words, y'all. It is, I get so nervous leading up to it, and I always just have so much fun learning from you, learning with you, and we don't ever really resolve anything, which is both the heartache and the beauty of the world that we live in, is we are constantly iterating and trying to do a better job for our fellow humans. And I appreciate both your contributions to that attempt today. And big shout out to Bree, who structures this, who keeps us all in line, who runs the graphics, who makes all the things work for us. Bree Campano is an amazing human being. She's about to run the ending credits. Thank you all for tuning in today. We will see you probably in the social waves, but definitely next Friday here at 8 a.m. Gordon will be off. We'll have a special guest, but it's going to be in another exciting episode of Fuzzy Lawgic. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.